Hey everybody, this is Valerie. Don't watch at night warning up top. This is a book club episode, meaning that months in advance we selected a book and we announced it on our show for you to read along with us so that you could then come to the discussion episode. Do consider the fact that we're about to drop some spoilers galore.
Part 2 was like, oh, so we're in the pink room of Twin Peaks. Like, I honestly kept picturing, even before Lynch had passed away, I kept picturing either him or Cronenberg's son, the son that did Infinity Pool. Those two needed to make this book into a film.
Hello and welcome back. This is Don't Watch at Night, a spooky little podcast dedicated to Spanish language horror and Latin American horror. I'm your host, Valerie.
And I'm Veronica.
Yes, and we are joined today for book club episode by our friend of the show, Perla Caballero.
Yeah.
Buenas noches. Hello. Happy New Year. Yes, La Señora is here to welcome us all in. Thank you again for welcoming
back.
back. Yeah. Oh my gosh. You guys sent me this email. I'm like, you want me back again? I didn't scare you away. Let me try harder.
You are here celebrating our 40th episode with us.
I know. And congratulations to you both. I know the pain that it is to have a podcast, work a podcast. That's why I've never launched my own. I'm a perfect guest for that reason. So congratulations on 40th, La Cuarenta, as I was saying it in my head. If we were together, I would have totally had like some Costco cake and some champagne. And been like,
Oh, man.
So tell us before we launch into anything, what's new with you? What's going on with you?
Bella has the biggest news.
Oh, yeah. So I did my divorce. I kept my engagement and wedding entirely off of social media until it was after the fact. So on November 16th, I was asked to my hand in marriage. He was also kind enough to tell me to go get a manicure. Like, you should go get a manicure before dinner.
So look good in the pictures.
Yeah, exactly. And then, the observant area in me, the Aries in me was noticing phone calls were happening. And so I was like, okay, I need to stop paying attention because I'm going to ruin it. And so I was just like, hey, so at dinner, do you think something like major is going to happen? Like, what level of like makeup should I put on? And he's like, the absolute best. I'm like, okay. And I start crying a little. And then a German opera started playing really loud. He's like, oh, she's freaking out. So yeah, he was in a very busy restaurant called the Radiator Whiskey. If you're ever in Seattle, I highly recommend it. He whispered in my ear and told me that it was time for us to put a relationship to the next level. And he was entirely in love with me. And I want to also point out the people listening to this episode and watching it, he heard my voice on a podcast and reached out to me.
Oh my God.
Wow.
What was the podcast? Wait, what was the podcast?
Out of curiosity.
We need
all the deets now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a defunct podcast, but I'll tell you later. I'll tell you off book because
it must be said your dress was amazing.
Yes, you looked
gorgeous. You. I bought that off the rack. And everything else was a vintage piece. I'll share a photo for you guys to post so you guys can share with our fans. And so we wanted to get married New Year's Eve, and this is how you know it's a second marriage for me. When I was like, well, if I put you in my docs and you're gonna mess me up, and I'm already going on your health insurance, so why don't we just get married January, the first Friday in January? We're like, great. So his grandma that is in her 80s flew out from Iowa, so she was really sweet after the ceremony. She was like, you have a grandma, and all my grandparents have passed away, so it was really sweet to see like his family from Iowa travel. My parents came up from California. My best friend, who I built our relationship watching repeats of David Lynch Lost Highway. He came up. He was in our bridal party. My two friends from Portland came. So we had a very like under 30 for Latinos. That's like tiny.
Yeah.
But I'm marrying a white boy from Iowa, and his family's just as big. So we're doing a reception in Iowa. If you want to come, you're more than welcome to. It's like north to you guys. But yeah, so I got married. We picked our judge because she spoke Spanish, and she was able to do the ceremony in English and Spanish and say my middle name, which is Xochitl, without even missing a beat. Perla XPX Caballero in my socials. And then so we had a Costco cake, which I really recommend. There was no cake left behind. Yeah, we got married, and I think the funniest thing I said was when we were signing our marriage license, I was like, holy shit, I got married. So yeah, and then I'm still running my book club and
That's right.
Morbid Curiosity. Yeah, West Seattle. And then, just avoiding the big dark, and there's a nightmare outside. So we're just just trying to stay positive. And
so I do want to point out, yes, at the time that this episode is getting released, at the time that you're listening to this, it is that day.
Here in the States.
That day of darkness. And so we encourage you to listen to us instead. Watch us instead.
Yeah. And then actually the David Lynch Foundation, God rest your soul, sweet gentleman. They have recommended at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to meditate for 10 minutes. And if you have the Calm app, which I highly recommend, do the daily Calm and just turn your brain off. And you get, I call it my little mini nap because I always fall asleep. But they do like, hey, wake up, they bring you back. And just, and it's been released that David Lynch passed away meditating, which is, if you know anything about him, he was a big fan of transcendental meditation. So the fact that he left this physical being doing what he loved and always was compassionate about. So yeah, definitely listen to this episode. Follow me if you want dog photos.
I have a fun game to kind of open us up, and then we're going to launch into talking about the cocktails. So the game we're playing today, ladies, is called Can You Guess the Horror Story from Just One Quote? And so you guys are working together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you the quotes. And then I'm going to read you the options, okay? It's going to be multiple choice. You can pick out. I want to let you both know beforehand. This quiz is circa 2015. So this is pre the revelations of a certain author in, what is it, The New Yorker? Was it The New Yorker? Where that
The New York Magazine. The New York
Magazine. Okay. So that particular author. So he does make an appearance in this quiz. And so FYI on that. But we're going to move on. So are you guys ready?
Ready.
Okay, here we go. So question 1. What horror novel is this line from? Listen to the quote.
Are they novels or books? I mean, books or movies?
They're books. These are books. It's a book club episode. I went and found us a horror book club quiz. So here we go. Here's the quote. Rachel's voice was grating, full of dirt. Darling, it said. Is it from Pet Sematary by Stephen King, The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, or The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson?
I'm going to go with Pet Sematary.
It is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Rachel is the name of the wife, right?
I was trying to remember her name. I was like, was it Rachel? I don't know.
This sounds terrible. I've never read Horror King. I've only read his publications on Hard Case Crime. But I do know like the movie, and that was scary.
I am familiar with that book only because, as people who have listened to this podcast from the beginning, that movie scarred me emotionally when I was like a child. So I know that book.
Yeah, okay, little Gabe.
Here's the next one. Which short story is this horrifying description from? I am a great, soft jelly thing, smoothly round, with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be, rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Is it from Click Clack the Rattle Bag by Neil Gaiman, The Color or Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft, or I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison? I didn't know this one.
I don't think it's Gaiman. That doesn't sound like
I think it's H.P. Lovecraft Color.
I was going to say.
Because they kind of work into these kind of blobby things.
Okay. It is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. But that was a good guess. I would have guessed H.P. Lovecraft as well.
Because color is messed up. And H.P. Lovecraft, like, we can't, like, we need to drag his ass too. He's a bad person too. So, I mean, we're not leaving anybody behind.
Just random. There's a booktuber on YouTube that she has like a whole series that she calls Authors Behaving Badly. And so she just like rips into.
Does she have a special on Janine Cummings? Ooh.
I do not know whence this troubling thought. Okay, so this is the quote. Loneliness will sit over our roofs with brooding wings. Is it from Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Dracula by Bram Stoker, or Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu?
Read it again, the little quote.
Loneliness will sit over our roofs with brooding wings.
I'm going to go with Dracula because that is his big thing. Is he yearns and he's so. I mean,
You are correct. It is Dracula.
Yes. Nosferatu for me. Yes, Nosferatu.
What chilling work gave us this line? I like to dissect girls. Is it from American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis? The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. Silence of the Lambs, I'm sorry. Or is it Carry On Comfort by Dan Simmons?
I'm going to go with American Psycho because
you are correct.
Oh,
yes.
I must sound like a psychopath to your fans. I am so sorry. That's also like my gateway horror book because of Bret Easton Ellis. I read Less Than Zero and then I read American Psycho. And then I couldn't read horror for like a year because I was so afraid.
This one's a tough one. I don't remember what the answer was for this either. Game. What book is this unsettling line from? If I could have broken his neck, I would have, just for the pleasure of the silence after the snap. Is it from The Ritual by Adam Neville, The Cipher by Kathy Koja, or The Ruins by Scott Smith?
Wasn't that the movie we just watched?
Well, we watched The Ritual.
The Ritual, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is based off of the book. I believe it's The Cipher. That's my guess. I don't remember.
But I'll say The Ruins just so we could do
I'm
1,
totally
2, 3.
Guessing.
It is The Cipher. The Cipher by Kathy Koja, if I'm saying that right. It's a great line. I love that line.
It is. I'm going to say I've had this intrusive thought, I think. Quite often.
Well, now who's the psycho?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Is there a reason? I mean, like, are you going to tell me next that you really like the Jailhouse song from Chicago?
That is a good song.
It is a good
Although
song.
my intrusive thought doesn't involve breaking necks, it involves like whacking people in the head with a 2x4. But
you would really like my current book called All That Is Wicked. He kills his wife with a mortar and pestle, and that is the big plot of the book. Yeah.
What short story produced this moment of horror? For a long while, we just stood there looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. Is it from The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Infamous Bingle Ming by Rajesh, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this, Parameswaran, or is it from A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner?
I'm not a big
I'm
going
to go with A Rose for Emily because Yellow Wallpaper is a woman talking to herself the entire time.
You are correct. It is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. Is it from Morella, The Telltale Heart, or The Black Cat?
Telltale
Heart.
You are correct. It is The Telltale Heart. You guys know your Poe.
I just listened to all those short stories right after I finished watching the new Fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah. Which novel includes this beautiful, frightening statement? I'm a gentleman, death in silken lace, come to put out the candles, the canker in the heart of the rose. Is it from, this should be so easy. If you're just guessing, this should be so easy. Anno Dracula by Kim Newman, The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, or The Woman in Black by Susan Hill?
I'm going to go with Anne Rice.
It is Anne Rice.
Yeah.
It is The Vampire Lestat.
Love putting in a good costume line. That's why I loved her books.
We are collectively the masters of fright. When it comes to all that is gruesome, horrific, and frightening, no one holds a candle to us, or a crucifix for that matter.
Oh, Perla. Nobody holds a candle to Perla.
Ladies and listeners, we are working with this is essentially a daiquiri that we're working with. Did you make it? Okay. Yeah.
I tried. My nice husband attempted to, so I don't know. It's we're there.
Good. I want you to follow this with me because I know it seems like a random drink to anyone who saw us post about it this week, but it's not random. It was very thoughtfully curated, and I'm going to tell you why. So this cocktail is definitely part of the daiquiri family. And as you can probably guess, we tweaked the name of it to fit this book club. So normally what this is called a Weekend at the Waldorf. And it's supposedly named after the 1945 film of the same name. It's like a comedy musical, I think, called Weekend at Waldorf. The reason why we went with this is because there is a very lovely bar and grill I think it's called Herbs and Rye in Las Vegas. And they have this on their bar menu, and and if you go to their Instagram, they have it all over their Instagram, the Weekend at Waldorf cocktails. So it's basically like a featured cocktail of theirs. I also personally, I associate daiquiris, for whatever reason, I associate them with like 1950s, 60s America. I don't know if that's written somewhere, but I feel like it was a popular drink of the 60s, because I know it's the 60s where where like the Mai Tai had a heyday, and the Mai Tai is another daiquiri. So
yeah, it's also when the rum trade really picked up as well, and
Mhm.
also it's around the time when the Cubans were starting to emigrate. Cubans and people of like the islands and so forth. So we
That's
had
right.
the Dominicans and the
Mhm.
Haitians, and so that they drink rum. They love el rum. I
Yes.
end up making a fool out of myself when I drink el rum. So that's another reason why. Because it's also, if you look at the music, like what was going on, the bossa nova was getting big, the lounges were
Mhm.
getting big, and it wasn't even just the United States. It was also Mexico was getting that infiltration. So you are on the right path of thinking like 60s is a big rum era. It's like the 20s was like bathtub gin. The 40s was whatever we could drink because we're at war. So
Right.
it was a more time of people. They were drinking rum, and daiquiris were they were extremely popular.
I do just want to read you guys a little bit of a snippet from the Cocktail Codex book. I'm holding it up. By the way, guys, we haven't said, but this is a video episode. So if you are a part of our Patreon, you will get this video episode as early as Sunday. You get your episodes a day early. So this is Cocktail Codex by Death & Co. And so I'm just going to read to you this little snippet on daiquiris. Hold on, I have to find. The daiquiri has enjoyed sensational popularity, with the unfortunate side effect that this simple, sour-style cocktail often manifests as a blender catastrophe. Though a frozen daiquiri blended with a produce stand of fresh fruits can be plenty tasty, the classic daiquiri is a modest combination of rum, lime juice, and sugar shaken and served up, and versions of the classic recipe can be found in countless vintage cocktail books. I am working with, I think it's called Flor de Cana, which is I'm working with their white rum. But if you can, there is also a rum called Cana Brava. If you can find that rum, I couldn't find it. My local liquor store didn't have it, and so that's apparently a really good rum, specifically for mixing drinks with. Because it's great if you want to work with a nice sippable rum. You don't necessarily need to. Sometimes those sippable rums are higher price points. So a Cana Brava, or like what I have, Flora de Cana, those are good rums that are good middle of the road prices that aren't going to break the bank. I just want to run through the recipe real quick for those of you who are not following us on social media, but you really should, because we post this stuff ahead of time so that you can be drinking your cocktails as you're listening to book club. So the weekend at it's either Alicia or Alicia, and we talked about this before. So depending on how you want to pronounce it, it's 2 whole strawberries that you're going to muddle in a cocktail shaker, 2 ounces of white rum, 3/4 ounces of like a orange liqueur or an orange
Curacao?
Curacao.
and
The person at the liquor store corrected me. I'm like, all right, you feel special.
and 3/4 ounce fresh lemon juice. I didn't get a chance to try this drink beforehand. I went in blind. It's really tasty. How do you like it, Bella?
I'm going to taste it right now. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh.
I was worried.
So this spells trouble.
Okay.
I could have 3 of these, and I would end up telling the darkest stories I learned while making tamales. Like
the darkest stories. Yeah,
that's the best chisme is Navidad tamales. Get the tias wired up, and
all the family secrets come out.
oh, they come running out.
if your tamales don't look beautiful, you're gonna get a talking to. You're gonna get pulled from the lineup.
Yeah, that's why I'm the packer. I'm like, I didn't do it. I just put it in the. No, it's really good. It's it's sweet, but not like really, you know what I mean? It's like a sweetness. It's a very simple, it's got the taste of the sour from the lemon.
It is really good. And I was a little worried because of what you said, like, because there's nowhere. And if you're someone who likes sweeter drinks, then maybe dress up those strawberries in like a strawberry infused simple syrup. But I was worried about that. I was like, there's really not enough of a sugar component. How's this going to come out? It tastes good. I think it tastes good.
I think the orange curacao it's a liqueur, so it's a more sweeter. Because when I opened the bottle, I was like, "Ooh, oh, hello." It is It is, and it's full body too. It isn't like what's like a drink that, I don't know, a Midori sour where you just make a face every time you drink it, like
tart face.
Yeah.
Yeah, so keep that in mind. Now, you're supposed to garnish with like a dehydrated lime wheel, and I forgot to pick them up I'm so mad because I specifically chose it, guys. If you go and you look, like a dehydrated lime wheel looks to me like something that has been turned inside out. It looks like something that is bloody and gross, like something that you would see in the walls of the Alicia. So I was just like, this is perfect. And then I forgot to buy it and I was so mad.
Or, some body parts that the mother had seen. I was like, shouldn't have had breakfast right about now. That was a bad mistake.
I do want to give you guys a little bit of history on what, like I said, this is our take on the Weekend at the Waldorf cocktail, which is a riff on the Waldorf. Well, I can't say that word. Waldorf. That's what it is. It's a riff on the Waldorf, which is a Prohibition era cocktail that first came to be in like the early 20th century. For those of you who haven't had one before, a Waldorf is considerably harder. Just to round my bases here, it's kind of like a Manhattan. The big difference is going to be that you're going to do an absinthe rinse on your glass before you pour your cocktail. So a Waldorf is the absinthe rinse. It's a rye, sweet vermouth, and Angostura bitters. And that's it. There's nothing else to it. So this is obviously the baby sister to Big Brother Waldorf. This is our Carmen to the Waldorf's Alvaro. So
right.
We're going to go now into talking about the first ester, which is the mocktail.
Is that the actual name of the cocktail, or you tweaked that
No,
name
that's
also?
I mean, there is no mocktail version of this. I kind of have to craft mocktails on the fly every time for book club. Anyone who's real big on mocktails, give me feedback. I have gotten really big into mocktails lately. I'm definitely reaching for those. So I'm learning a lot. And what I will tell you about the first ester and about non-alcoholic rums in general, the one that we're going with, RK alcohol-free white rum. And the reason we're going with that one is specifically because it is good for mixing drinks. Just keep that in mind. There are some that are going to be good for sipping, but if you put them in a mocktail, they're going to disappear. And I came to find out that it's because if we're talking about mocktails and non-alcohol alternatives, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not going to be an exact substitute for your alcohol because water-based distillates don't behave the same way. So you just want to keep in mind that when you're experimenting with mocktails, and it is true mixology, play with things like fruits and botanicals and teas, things that infuse flavor and add flavor into your drink. And then also be careful that you're not over shaking or over stirring, because the difference between an alcohol drink and a non-alcohol drink, an alcohol drink needs that ice dilution. That's why you shake it up. That's why you stir it. But if you overdo that in a mocktail, you're just going to like flatten your drink. So do it with care. Be minimal when it comes to that. And play with flavors, because that's kind of where the mixology comes into play and gets really fun. I will run you through the first ester recipe. That's going to be the same. You're going to muddle your whole strawberries. You're going to do your RK, non-alcohol white rum. Then there's the 3/4 ounce of Lyre's, which is a really popular brand for non-alcoholic beverages. Their non-alcoholic orange sec. And then 3/4 ounce fresh lemon juice. Not lime juice, lemon juice.
I forgot to say this in our last podcast. What was it called? The Christmas drink? Mistletoe martini?
Mistletoe martini.
I did like that.
Okay.
It came out very good. You have to talk to Robert, though, because he did not strain the ice out of it.
Oh, okay.
Wait. So did he make it for you again and remember the simple syrup the next time?
Yes.
Okay.
I did both ways. It was better with the simple syrup. The first time, better like he made it. He forgot to put the simple syrup in it.
And you're just like...
It was a little tart, but I still liked it.
Yeah. That's the one that had cranberries in it, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm such a simple person that I will sometimes take the recipes and go to a bar like, can you make me this?
And they'll do it?
If I tip them high enough, yes.
I was gonna say, that's cool. That's a good idea.
I'm like, can you make me this? And then, slip a 10.
We read Extended Stay by Juan Martinez. It is a book that came out in 2023.
All right. So in a rundown neighborhood in the heart of Las Vegas, the Alicia or I think we decided it was Alicia. The Alicia, because those white people. The Alicia Hotel awakens and beckons to the most vulnerable, those with something to hide. Haunting and visceral, Extended Stay uses the language of body horror and the Gothic to comment on the complicated relationship between the Latinx undocumented experience and capitalism, the erasure of those living and working on the margins, the heavy toll exacted by memory, and the queasy permeability of boundaries that separate the waking world from the world of dreams.
Bella, we're going to open with you. I want to, before we launch into like any specific thing or like, you know, passages from it, I just want to capture your initial feelings on this read. You've read it, you have read it twice now.
No, I'm going to reread it. Like, so I've read it like 1.5 times, if that makes sense.
1.5 times. Okay.
Because I went back to reread passage part 2. I was like, I feel like I've missed something. And I did.
So initial, like, what are your feelings coming off of this read? And
so chapter 1, Mr. Juan Martinez. Dear God, did you just want to put blood on the pages? My God. I think we need to all
talk about our feelings about chapter 1.
So I was just like, all right, so this is and chapter 1 is always the world building. This is where you're gonna be, oh, okay, so this is where we're gonna go. I'm standing. So chapter 1, I was, again, same thing with Australia. I'm reading a book in public and I'm like, I need to not do this ever. Next time I get brought back, if I ever come back, I need to just read these in my room by myself and scream "what the fuck" really loud. But it really puts I felt a lot of sweat.
Yes.
In his, like, I could feel, like, my Apple Watch alerted me twice, like, your heart rate's going up. Like, no,
are you okay? Are you having an event?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I did not do the audiobook, because I'm like, I can't do that. I can't go on a rage walk because I'm just going to start running and like kill myself in the process of running away from the book. Get away from me, you know,
running away from the voices in my ear.
Yeah, exactly. Get them out of me. I'm going to throw like my Apple, you know, my AirPods into the like shadeless sheet because I walk around the perimeter of it. I really was just like, wow, but it's also a really amazing brother-sister story. And that is the main focus of the story. It's about sacrifice. It's about love. It's about what are you willing to do for free rent? And also it's the plight of the undocumented. They are the sacrifice, and they really are the backbone of the hotel industry in Las Vegas and in the kitchens as well. But it also shows the community in there, like when they first are there and they're like, okay, this kid can't cook anything. And you're like, why are they being so nice to him? Oh, it's because they want to kill him. I really enjoyed this book. I definitely would have loved to have seen Lynch take a pass at this, or someone Lynch inspired. It's definitely in that realm, or Cronenberg or Clive Barker. A lot of body horror. But it was really well done for being also an emotional story of survival and grace. It is really great. Like, I never heard of this book, and I feel so bad, which again goes to the political race is like, if it's a brown person on the cover, we're not. But thank you for selecting this book. But holy shit, chapter 1. I was like, can I read my favorite line from
of course,
chapter 1?
Yes.
Alvaro learned that neither he nor Carmen knew their extended family too well. Their grandfather was too old to care for them. Brother and sister spent the bulk of their days together. Him still shivering in their grandfather's squall row house in part of Barigua. He had not known the room was hot, and his sister still was not asking. What everyone knew about Carmen was that she was brilliant. She'd drawn anything you asked, and she was their dad's appetite for numbers and structures. She went to school and returned, and when he realized that he was revealed that he felt not having anyone giving him a hard time about dropping out. Carmen didn't care. His grandfather didn't quite know. And in the fog of their grief, it was too hard to tell how anyone else felt. And it really set that brother-sister relationship. Like, Carmen, so an entire family gets slaughtered in front of him.
Yes.
I don't even want to like bring up that fucking mom. Oh my God. And then it turned out to be mistaken identity, which that's the part where I was like, Oh, so we're going to do that now, are
That's
we,
the
Mr.
part where
Martinez?
I put the book down and I looked at my husband who had read this before I did, and I was like, so it was the wrong people?
Yeah.
I was like, all
Yeah.
pissed.
And then like armless guy is like, do you remember me? No, of course he fucking doesn't. Like, what's like, who are you? He starts hallucinating. They're coming for you. But was it Hotel Alicia like coming?
Yeah.
Or Alicia
Yeah.
coming for him? Because when those lines started to come back, I'm like, oh, please tell me this is not all linked to the hotel. You did not just slaughter that little girl so you could have your sacrifice. The fog of grief is something that is encompassing, and until you're in it, you don't know where you are until someone's pulling you out. And I think Garmin did a good job of just not asking, not just drew her pain out. And then when he's like, we need to get out of here, and she's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Let's take the money that we got and we'll go to America. And, you know, she didn't care. They forged documents. She was older. She didn't care. She just wanted it to be far, far away from where they were. And it's terrifying because it's still technically happening.
Ronnie, I also want to like hear from you. Like, what were your initial feelings coming off of this read? Did you just because Bella, I had a text from her like just shy of 1 a.m.
Should we?
I'm like,
should
did
I
you just
should we
finish
just
this
have
book?
a text chain? Yeah. Should we just have a text chain?
We should. So here's the thing. My husband read this, like, in fact, this is his book. It's why I think I recommended it, because we already had it in the house, and he read it last year. And so when he found out that we were going to read it for the podcast, he was like, oh, you know, Vero, that it's pretty brutal. So I don't know how you're going to take to it. So I procrastinated reading it. I didn't even start this book till like Sunday, and I finished it Wednesday. Because I just put off, and then like I read the first chapter and I was like, oh God, I don't know if I can do this. And so opposite of you, Bella, I switched to the audiobook because I was like, okay, well, at least I can, you know, if it gets rough like that again, I can just speed up and just whiz through the traumatic parts. And so I procrastinated for the long time, and I wasn't in the headspace for something this heavy. As soon as I finished it, I went to the bookstore and I bought a middle grade book to read to just kind of lighten
for self-care. Yeah.
For self-care, yes.
This is why I read my like hard case crime little mystery like smut novels, like hard detective smut novels, because there's always a murder, there's always some sex, there's the mystery, and then a twist, and then bye-bye book, you know. So real quick, 100 pages, sexy pulp novels, you know, just that's what I break in between books like this.
Yeah,
like
it was a trip, man. I mean, it was kind of The Shining with eldritch horror going on, body horror, grief, and just the trauma that we carry no matter where we go. That's, you know, we sit in it, we live with it. Like in that passage that you read, Bella, about how, you know, Gadaman's not asking and he's not telling and they're not communicating. And like the social worker in me is like, but if they had ever like sat and talked about it, how might things have been different? Like, would they have both been chained up in their own separate cells of grief, and how might that have affected their interactions with the hotel down the road?
Ooh, yeah. True.
But yeah, I just thought it was, and as horrible as the first chapter was, there was almost, with the writing style, it wasn't clinical, but it was just very utilitarian the way it was. It wasn't like super emotive. There was a detachment, at least for me, which I think makes sense.
Wait, are we in chapter 1? We're talking chapter 1?
Yeah, still chapter 1. There was a detachment from the writing, and actually throughout the story, which makes sense because Alvaro's so traumatized.
Well, yeah, I feel
he has to keep that distance in order to not just completely lose it.
Well, yeah, I feel like what chapter 1 did so well, and it was only like in the moment when I was reading it, and I'll get to where I was in the car with my family. When I was reading chapter 1.
No, that is worse.
In a car with my children in the backseat. But
and then you come to a complete pause, and you're like, if a girl and a gun comes, we're just gonna just chop her hand off. We'll chop her hand off.
We're just gonna run her down, and we're gonna keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Floor it.
Yeah, exactly. But give me that iPad. I'm gonna smack someone with it.
But yeah, I feel like what the writing does really well is just sort of like, Alvaro, you leave I can just only imagine, but I'm like, you've got to leave your body a little bit when that kind of trauma is inflicted upon you. I imagine you have to like disassociate heavily just to
and I think that's why he starts hallucinating that that person is like, oh, give them to me, give them to me. And I'm like, is that the angel of death? Is like, where are we?
You're just like not in your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And just, and his little sister, like that's where I was just like, I just like looked out the window.
It was awful.
It's like every new horror with the descriptions of what's happening to the dad, and then the mother, and I was like, oh my God,
the mother,
is he ever going to stop? Like, how much worse can it get? And it would get worse.
Oh, and it gets worse. But also amazing first chapter, because that is what hooks people.
Well, because it stirred up so much. Like I said, I was trapped in a car with my family when I was reading this chapter. And like I finished the chapter, I put the book down, and I was just like quiet. We were on our way to like a state park. We were taking the kids for like some day hiking. Like, so, I mean, I was just
so you're going to just walk in the forest with your family. So you just real planned that one out real good, didn't you?
I mean, listen, so the irony is like, we're at the field later, like hiking. And my middle kid goes out of nowhere, just randomly goes, because we're in some tall grass. He's like, man, if I had a machete. And I was like, don't say machete to me right now. Like, I don't want to talk about
that kid. I would have taken the iPad away. I would have been like, no iPad for you. Like, what did I do? Like, I'll tell you later.
Please don't say that to me right now. but
yeah.
Like,
oh my God. Yeah.
I was sitting there thinking about it, and I was trying to have a conversation with my spouse about it, and I couldn't articulate what I wanted to say. But it brought me to a question that I guess I kind of want to like pose to you guys as well to think about, because like what I was thinking about coming out of that chapter was that particular violence that they were experiencing that particular time. And I was thinking about our own country, and like what we're in. Would you even be able to recognize when home was no longer home anymore, like no longer a safe space? And assuming that you could, would you have the strength to leave it? Because like my brain kept thinking about that. I think it was like a truck driver or somebody who was on the blockade with them, who kept kind of trying to reassure them, like, we're going to be fine. This happens all the time. Before. We're going to get through this, and we'll be on our way.
When they were getting walked into the forest, was like touching them in the back and like, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. We're going to get out of this. Yes. And he talks about how it annoyed him. And then it came back and he's like, oh, if I could have my dad do that to me right now.
Right.
Oh, don't worry, buddy.
You get this.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so you can condition yourself. Yeah, you can condition yourself to accepting a certain level of disruption, which is what they do. They're like conditioning themselves to accept the fact that these blockades are part of life, and we're going to get through this and it'll be fine. So you can condition yourself to accept that. And I'm not trying to say the US is in any way on par with like anything that is going on in any other country in the world right now. But I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we have vulnerable and marginalized groups in our country who feel under threat and who don't feel safe and who are under attack. And so it's just like, I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but it really made me evaluate, like, could I recognize when home wasn't safe enough anymore for me to stay? I don't know if you guys were grappling with any of that in reading the first chapter or not. That's where my headspace was. You know that meme of that dog with the mug who's just like, in the room is on fire. And he's like, this is fine.
This is fine.
Everything's fine.
This is fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's fine.
Like, at what point do you say this is not fine?
Oh, this isn't fine. When you don't. So when you come home and you're like, oh, thank God I'm home. I can take off my bra. I can check my Instagram. That feeling of like, when you come home and you feel anxiety, that's not home anymore. You need to get out. You might want to edit this part out, but I mean, you have Stephen Miller who's sitting there jerking off to the idea that he's going to round up the brown people, and they're going to read up Operation Wetback in the 40s. They rounded up American citizens and put them in the middle of Mexico, and they fought and they won. And that's why there's a huge generation of kids that are no sabos, because the parents decided, oh, you know what? We can't speak Spanish anymore. We can't do our customs anymore. We can't, I grew up in the 80s and it was still taboo to speak Spanish and speak English at the same time. I'd go to school and they're like, oh, she speaks Spanish, so she's illiterate. Like, no, dumbass, I can speak in T language. I'm a little bit more smarter than you. So it is that idea that your safe haven, like you said, Valerie, is when you're safe and that gets taken away, what do? Can you uplift? Can you remove yourself from the situation? Some people can't. And then there's the every election cycle, they're like, oh, the migrants are coming. And then you're hearing their stories that they have very similar to what happened in chapter 1. They're escaping the pain, they're escaping the violence, and they will walk miles and miles and miles to come to the United States, and they will scrub toilets. They don't care. They just want to be away and create the American dream and start from the bottom and go to the top, become homeowners, have their children be college graduates.
America is like Rocky in the third Rocky movie where he's just coasting. He's not really being tested against like the real good prize fighter. So he's kind of, that's America. Like we think the propaganda is the greatest country in the world, blah, blah, blah. When we rank like really low on so many metrics compared to other countries. And we're Rocky at the beginning of Rocky 3.
I don't know. I'm jumping around a little bit, but there were key moments in the book where I felt like that's really highlighted, where Alvaro is like being able to move through spaces and he's, invisible. But I feel like the book also just sort of really highlights some of the other societal ills, like consumerism. I mean, in a city in like Vegas in particular, right? Like just consumerism, greed, all of those things, the ways in which we sacrifice and exploit workforces, in particular immigrant workforces. And so I don't know if you guys had anything you wanted to share there or say about that.
Also the front of the house to the back of the house. We have Ellie and Winfred, who are white women who have... Oh,
sorry.
No. I mean, Coco Chanel is we're just...
I love that name.
The front of the house, the back of the house experience. So I was just recently in Las Vegas in October, as I mentioned, and there is the class dynamic of the person that took my order spoke perfect English, but the person that was assisting me getting my food, being the bus person, spoke with an accent, which clearly meant, and it wasn't just Latinos. Like I met Jamaicans, I met people from the islands. It is definitely the invisible people.
Alvaro, Marisol, her boyfriend, what's his name? Humberto. All these people, like they're literally in this world, in this book, literally like fodder for the machine. They're there just for their usefulness to the hotel, to the people that own the hotel, to capitalism, and they're just kind of like literally being consumed.
The Plum Blazers, and then what was it, like Seattle, and then Kara was the machine. Was like the part that I was like, oh wait, Kara's just a group of people. It's a syndicate. It's not a. I was kind of like ripped off, and I was like, oh, god dang it.
I wanted to read this passage. I have a lot of passages.
I saw your Instagram live, and I'm like, oh, we're on video. Oh, okay. And then I saw the tabs, and I'm like, oh, she came. She is ready.
Well, there's like the writing is so beautiful, and particularly towards the end, I cried. I reread the ending today because I was preparing my notes, and I cried again in reference to what we were talking about earlier with, in this case, I think it kind of highlights the immigrant experience a little bit, but also in a roundabout way, it also highlights what I was talking about with chapter 1, and kind of what chapter 1 made me reflect on is just like, would you even be able to recognize when you are living in a nightmare that you need to leave, or essentially, quote unquote, wake yourself up from the nightmare? So in this passage, this is chapter 25, page 254. It's Alvaro talking, or Alvaro, this is about him. It says, he had gone anyway and lied to himself. That was always the great comfort, the easiest lie to believe, that they'd be fine, that things wouldn't get worse, that Carmen at least would be fine, she'd be safe even if he wasn't, that the only person he was putting at risk was himself, that he could leave her and she'd be fine, that they needed to wait anyway, that he needed to convince her to wait, because payday was only a few days away. That was the awful thing. They missed the moment where they could have slipped away, and now his sister was trapped, him too. He'd be trapped if he tried to go after her. So just like that lie that we all tell ourselves, that it's like, it's fine, this is fine, like it's not going to get worse. It's in my head, like it's okay. We just need to get to XYZ. If I can just get to the next payday, if I can just get to the next paycheck, like something will shift,
and then
in
it
our
becomes
favor.
Too late.
And it becomes too late. So I thought that like there's just lots of passages in the book that I feel kind of touch on that experience, because, and I say this because like in our resources that we are including for listeners and show notes, there are interviews with the author. This book definitely does touch on the immigrant experience, I think, and yet I don't feel like any of the interviews I read or listened to really allowed him, the author, to go there. And so I'd be interested, and we're not an interview format podcast, but I'd be interested to hear him speak on that experience as it pertains to this book, because I feel like there's stuff that I took away from the writing that reflects on that, but I don't feel like I encountered any resources that talk about that really dive into that, and I'd be interested in diving into that. Did you guys come across any passages that for you stood out in that way?
I'm trying to find it. It's the one on people burying their grief. And it was after Dan had been injured. And he was like, oh, I guess people, because then he came back and business was normal. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody talked about it. And I even read it out loud to my husband. And it was like, oh, maybe sometimes just people continue working to ignore their grief. And
yeah,
man,
and those are the things. Those are the things that stood out more to me. And again, as readers, as consumers of whatever media, we bring our own stuff into it and what we pull out of it. And so, being that I'm a social worker, the things that stood out to me that I focused or honed in on more was not really the immigration experience. It was more the grief and the trauma and the processing of trauma. And because even from the beginning, it seemed to me that from the start, Alvaro was suffering some level of depression.
And post-traumatic stress. I mean,
yeah, well, even before that, when he was just talking about like he kept quitting college,
he couldn't,
lack motivation, he would cry for no reason.
Right.
So he was already suffering from that. And then you compound what happened with his family. So then you have the post-traumatic stress from that. But also something that is a lot less known and talked about outside of the mental health field is moral injury. And I think for sure he's suffering from moral injury.
Speak on that more.
Moral injury is, and I work for the VA, so my personal experience has been with soldiers, veterans, and this comes across a lot with them. Moral injury is when you are forced to do something that goes against your own moral compass. So like soldiers who are forced to kill in combat or that sort of thing. And obviously he had to shoot his sister. He's definitely going to feel a sense of moral injury because that contradicts who he is, his own personal moral sensibilities, his knowledge of right and wrong. So he's dealing with that. And so he's carrying all that. So those are the things that really stuck out more to me. And the whole fact that Alvaro isn't even his name. He took the name, the fake name of the person that his father was accidentally murdered in place of. So it's kind of like almost wearing a scarlet letter, over his own sense of guilt, his own sense of survivor's guilt, of shame at what he did. To me, that was all what I was like really focusing. And I was like, we never even find out his real name, right? In the whole,
the closest we get is they start calling him El Galán in the kitchen. And then he said, oh, I almost said my name is close to that. And then you're like,
so the whole book, he doesn't have his own identity. Which is a whole other thing, right?
Another passage I thought was really good.
Did you find the one that you were looking for? The one?
No, but I found the other one, which I really like, which was 78.
Okay.
And this is after he'd been in floor 3 and met the index cards. And then he's like, wait till she hears about the room with the index cards. Wait till she hears about Ellie and Clarabelle. We chased a dog and she's here with us and she's here in the hotel and hiding. Just wait. The slot machines chirped their short song. They chirped it again. Someone yelled, and it was kind of a short and happy yell that everyone working the casino grew accustomed to. A big win, followed by a big loss. A crowd echoed the yell, applauded, and the world below and the world of gamblers, croppers, continued in its business, and in doing so insisted in perpetual lie. Nothing of consequence happened, and nothing of consequence could happen. Everything was fine. That's why I pulled it, because everything was fine.
Everything was fine.
The big lie.
The American, quote unquote, dream that we sell people, and what is reality? Because like I started to sort of see the face beneath the face. Kind of became a
that was a great line. And if you ever seen Eyes Without a Face, it hit that note hard. It was the face within the face, which is like the fakeness that you put out to the world. Like, at work we have to
America is this beacon on a hill, but
and so that's what
when you go, the underbelly, the dark underbelly is
Yeah, I mean, like that, like the face beneath the face really stood in for me as like what the US kind of represents. And so, like, there's passages that just sort of started to really stick out at me once I made that note for myself. Like this one on page 265, the face had no easy analog, immense and writhing, a mass of appendages from which other tentacles unspooled, beyond which Alvaro spotted stars and nebulae, kept in place by wet black coils. Bigger than us, bigger than anything, bigger than our world, bigger and indifferent. You could fall, you could be swallowed, you could so easily slip in, and the system that kept the coils slithering over each other would barely register your presence, your sacrifice.
Have you guys ever seen An Evening in Soho?
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Watch it. It's by the same guy that did like Hot Fuzz and the Sean.
I do know those movies.
Yeah, so this girl is like obsessed with the 60s, just wants to live in the 60s, but she's in modern time, and she like somehow starts like mind jumping into Last Night in Soho. She starts mind jumping to the 60s in this way. She like plays a record, and then like she ends up there as another woman, but then she realizes that it is, to be a singer in London, you can sing, but you're also a sex worker, and you're following your dream, and that's what she sees in the magazines. But these
Right.
women are getting exploited, and it's the idea of like, yes, but the dream is rotten. Those final chapters, I was just like, oh my God, please just let them be happy together. I want them. And
Let them get it. Yeah.
Well,
Well, there's that whole motif through talking about the underbelly of the American dream. There was also, and it was repeated several times throughout the book, about how they're all infected. They're all infected, with this American dream. And there's this passage that I liked. I always like to pick out passages that when I write my review, I always like to like highlight a specific passage that's not too spoilery for people who don't want spoilers, but it says, "Here is what he knew, what he learned. The more he tried to resist, the more he tried to leave, the more he hungered to stay, the greater the force that kept him in the Elysia, save none." Which kind of circles back to what you said, Valerie, your thoughts about how do you know when home isn't home, and when the realization comes to leave, is it too late because you were waiting for that next paycheck or that next perfect time, or the stars to align for you to get out, but it's still the things that are pulling you to stay planted where you are instead of making your escape. And that phrase, that I forget who said it or where it was said, is the drawback to listening to an audiobook is that if I don't have the book with me to immediately mark the spot, I don't remember where it was, but what was it? Serve all, save none, which could be read different ways, right? Because when you say serve all, service is like something that you're giving out to other people, right? But in this hotel, it could also be serve food. So we're going to serve all to the Elysia's food, saving none. Like, what was your thoughts on that? Serve all, save none.
Serve all, save none. I mean, if you were to take it to like, honestly, when you say that to me, if you were to take it to the broader context of the the capitalist, talking about societal ills, the capitalist mindset, how not just Vegas, but how many cities operate. Like take a look at our own state, us in Texas. At the height of COVID, we never had lockdown here in Texas. We just had like stay at home because, our state leaders chose to do that. But we had our lieutenant governor of the state of Texas kind of advocating in interviews on television. We don't need to protect our grandparents. Our grandparents are essentially, they're ready to die for the state economy. Like it's that kind of mentality that serve all. It's for the greater good. If you sacrifice yourself, save none, like that's what that evokes for me, is just like this, again, it's going back to sacrifice everything for not even your piece of the American dream, because there is no dream, but it's the lie that we want to keep selling of what this is.
The men from Seattle, like he was the one that said we're all infected, because remember he also like took a piece of the hotel and fed it to Dan, and he was able to rejuvenate himself.
Yeah.
And then we met Clarabelle, or not Clarabelle. What was the mother's name? When we find Marisol,
was it Charlene?
Like,
Charlene?
Yes,
Charlene.
Yeah, when we meet Charlene, and then she's humming the Three's Company theme song, which I was like,
well, So what did you
Coming
guys think of that?
after
The Marisol
the
chapter?
nightmare room.
That felt very
That was
Hellraiser to me.
No, thank you.
Yeah, Hellraiser, exactly. That was where I was like, oh, so we're in Clive Barker territory.
Yeah,
thank you.
It is.
I was like,
Or the fact,
Sorry, wrong room. Back out. Slowly.
I was like, you're like, oh, pardon. No, that I regretted eating breakfast and then reading that passage because I was like, I gotta keep reading. It was, or the fact that they lied and someone mimicked her voice, and that's why he didn't want to pick up the phone to tell Carmen, and even then she's not able to. Alvaro can't tell Carmen like, I'm on my way out, I'm on my way home, because she can't understand him because it's trying to learn his voice. And she was like, oh, she got sick and then she went to CVS, but she's fine. And then Umberto is also getting cloned and being rejuvenated. But the real Umberto was like, where the hell is Marisol? Why is she not here? And then we find out what happened to the real Marisol, because he bartered. He did what was happening to his, the people of the employees of the hotel, which was, I'll give you B, but you need to give me Marisol. And they're like, yeah, we'll take her to Marisol. She was.
Well, you know what was so interesting is because it makes me wonder how that giving up of Marisol took place. Because when Alvaro makes the realization that he's given up Carmen, it's such a subtle thing that you don't pick up on until it's highlighted later in the book. When he realizes, oh my God, it was when I gave Winifred the backpack. That's when I gave her up, and I didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't know,
He didn't
and we
knowingly
didn't know.
give her up.
Right. Like he didn't knowingly give her up. And it kind of makes me wonder, it's like, did Umberto give her up? Or was it like, it's so.
I think he was sold a bill of goods and told this is for the better, because that's why.
Because he even says they don't explain it to you. It's like it would be like the little teeny tiny print in a contract. Like you think you're
the area of
to one
I
thing.
work in.
Yeah, you think you're agreeing to one thing, but in reality, the fine print, it's something totally different.
Yeah, anytime you read a contract, always read the liabilities and who just, this isn't legal advice. It's just the way of life. But yeah, it was the terms and conditions of the exchange was like, oh, so I'm going to give you this backpack, and that way we can have Carmen safe, and her things are here, darling. And Winifred was also working that, always smoking, like pulling out the cigarette to have him light it, and the plum jacket. I honestly think after she saw Dan get eviscerated not once but twice, she made her deal with the devil. I think Winifred was just gaming, and there was the other thing in this book was there was no loyalty behind the brother and the sister. Between them they had loyalty, but everybody else was fair game. They would kill their own coworker to save their own ass.
And maybe I missed something listening to the audiobook, so for you ladies that read it with your own eyeballs, why did it seemed to me that Ellie never seemed to be affected, or at least seemed blissfully unaware that all this stuff was happening, that Alvaro seemed to pick up on pretty quickly after starting working there? Why was it that Ellie seemed apart from that?
Like not corrupted by it, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, because like you get the vibe that she is certainly a more central character than like Umberto, for instance. Yeah, but it doesn't seem like she was corrupted by.
Like she seemed totally oblivious that anything weird.
Even though she ultimately does get given up to, or whatever, she gets she gets pulled into the walls of the Alicia as well.
I think because she could be traced back when they start feeding the hotel. They are hunting the undocumented workers, the ones that they knew, like, oh, if we take them away, no one's going to come looking for them.
Maybe
Ellie's
that's what
established.
it is,
She says she has family. She
lives.
She grew up in Las Vegas, so she has a history. And this goes. I mean, this is just. I just finished reading the John Wayne Gacy book, and the only reason why he got caught was because he killed a rich kid, and the parents went and freaked out, and that's how he got caught. He killed a rich kid, and he had over 20 victims buried in his house.
So maybe that's what it is then. It's just like the rest of these people are all marginalized. Although like Ellie, I got the impression is also an immigrant as well, but it's like you said, she's established,
she's a white immigrant.
Family, she's a white immigrant. And so she's not as easily disappeared as the rest of them are. That's a good point. Little
Lost and
questions
Found.
too.
Can we talk about them? Because
Dumb and Dumber?
Holy shit.
Dumb and Dumber?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Baby Huey. The scene with all the different like stacked bodies in the penthouse and all the broken heads. Like, why are you doing this to me? Or the fact that he like picked up the body and the head never moved, meaning that they had broken all the heads off like dolls. The idea of like ice always looming, but like Lost and Found. It took me a while to realize that the twins in Lost and Found were the same people because they were, they were the security, they were the muscle, but they were also like they were fighting for their lives too. But what was up with all the different incarnations of Esther and
all the Esthers, all of the, like, I got the sense when we talk about Jacob, like I can't remember the exact passage, but you get the notion, you get the idea that there have been multiple Jacobs. And so that was sort of like,
or is it just the same Jacob, like reincarnated, for lack of a better word, or cloned, or whatever you want to say, that just they were at some point in time. And there is actually, that I found kind of late last night, a short story called Esther that Juan Martinez wrote the year before this book was actually published. And so it's very short, like I wouldn't even know if I call it a short story. It's like just paragraphs long, but it has Jacob, and it's set in 1855. So it seems like they're Mormons to me, like more, because I think they even references. I read this at like 2 a.m. so it's a little fuzzy in my brain. But it references
like reading time.
It references the
best,
followers.
That's the best time to read.
It references the followers of, is it John Smith, the head of the
Mormon,
Mormon,
Jesus of Christ of Latter-day Saints or whatever,
traveling in their wagons and
bring
in
them young.
In the short story, like all the women and the children are already dead. It's just the men left, and they're trying to vanquish this entity, whatever. So I don't know if Jacob, who is referenced in that short story, if they were just consumed by the entity, whatever the face beneath the face is, and they've just kind of been trapped there all this time, and they just take form, or the Alicia gives them form as needed to, I don't know. It's very weird. I have a lot of questions that were not there.
I kind of felt like, especially when I think it was Jacob that said like, oh, we're consumed. We come, the reason why we do this for longevity, for long life, for riches. And it is essentially like the American consumerism and the dream of to being alive and being able to see centuries and centuries. But at what cost? I mean, their gray skin, like the fact that he said the indentation, they are just they're also kind of the way Alvaro described them was they're miserable. They didn't like what they were doing, but they did it. And then the fact that they lost control of the hotel, quote unquote, they lost control of the mother. But was it because they lost the control on the exchange of that relationship? Because she was like, you know what? You don't control me. I'm going to do my own thing, which is slaughter the entire town of Las Vegas. Or, the fact that the hotel was growing and building itself.
Yes.
Like when we lose
like a living organism that they're inside.
There's just a lot of things that aren't answered there. So like, the
photographs where they're, and even Alvaro's in those photographs.
Yes.
And
that felt very The Shining to me, of just like, you've always been here, that kind of.
But I want them to get out. Like, I don't, and does Alvaro get out? He doesn't physically get out because he ultimately sacrifices himself.
Yeah, it's like he sacrifices himself.
So is this going to
But then you don't know, like, what do Carmen and Esther go to? Like, what is their future? What is this? Like, are they, because it's like I forget if it's Winifred or somebody who's like, we're not human.
We're not people.
Like, we're not people. It's somewhere, I don't know who says this. This is the line, but I wrote it down. Because we were never people, we were fodder. Which is also another great,
it could just be
great expression of the immigrant experience,
people.
right?
We're just fodder for the machine, right?
How we're perceived.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not people.
We just feed it. Yeah.
B also mentions how this is cyclical, right? With the Alicia, like she wakes up every however many years, and so like, is Alvaro just going to be trapped in this cycle
or when they go back to their extent, they're like, we got to get out of here, and then they go to the extent of saying someone's broken into it and made it a drug den, and there's glass everywhere. And he's like, well, I got to go back to the hotel. And Carmen's like, dude, don't go back. Like, don't don't go, you're going to be trapped. And then I honestly think him going back after they escape is what really kicks off the third act. And I'm like, here we go.
The epilogue of this book, which is essentially to me the finale of this book. What did you guys feel? I guess like what we should point out is like there are moments in the passages of this story where it feels like the voice of the book shifts and it feels like he's talking to you directly. Like he'll use
there's a lot of
you
mentions
statements
to like you, and I go, who's you?
And like the whole time I was reading, I was like, well, who's he talking to? And then I was like, well, I guess we're going to find out. And then by the end, it all comes together. It all makes sense. And we see that Garmin has sacrificed himself in the hope. He has no idea, but Alvaro sacrifices himself in the hope that he can save Carmen somehow. Then by the end, we come to see that the voice is him talking to Garmin, which I thought was really, like, that's where I started crying.
Well, it's come full circle, right? Because in the beginning, he did what he had to do to preserve himself. Not that it was really much of a choice. His sister was probably going to die anyway, but he still had to, in his mind, in his own sense of guilt, he traded his sister's life for his.
Yes.
And then at the end, it's the reverse. He's trading his life to save hers.
So I wanted to ask you guys, towards the end of the story, Carmen is telling Alvaro that Esther, this is before he has sacrificed himself, when like they're whatever, he's seeing all of these people that the Alicia had sucked up, and he was, presumably they were gone, they were dead, they're God knows what. But he's seeing all of them at this dining table. Carmen is telling Alvaro that Esther carries her. We all carry each other. One day you'll remember. One day you'll sit with her in a park and you'll see her draw and you'll remember. Later, as he's dying because he's sacrificed himself in this hope that maybe he can save her, that moment comes back to him where he's remembering, like it's like he's dying. He's lost memory of her by name at least, but he remembers a young woman saying, we all carry each other. So I wanted to ask you guys how you interpret that, what that means to you. We all carry each other.
There's the poem of like, I carry you in your heart. That's always read at funerals. Like, I carry you in your heart and I carry you always. Especially with the passing of family members, you want to keep their memory alive as much as possible. So there is a reason why, especially Mexicans, they do celebrate Dia de los Muertos, is to keep the memories alive of those who we have lost, of, the pets we've lost, the children that have died, the adults that have died. It's, how should I describe it? There's like, I don't know if it's Immanuel Kant or sorry to getting all literal, or Freud, who's like says like every person that you interact marks you. You take something away and you mark them as well. And it is like the instant connection. So once that connection is dead, say that person passes away, and then you're like, oh. But they were always, it's the idea of like memory is like when anytime I see like Guayabera shirts, I always think of my abuelito that passed away. That kind of idea of like the memory of that person, their legacy lives on by you mentioning them. And so that's why when they were like, oh, and they talked for days because they're talking about all the people that they've interacted with. And they're building this world. And that's where I was like, oh my God, we're not going to have a happy ending, are we? But of course it's horror. We're not supposed to have one.
This is where we tie in David Lynch. Like, it makes me think a little bit about in interviews and stuff. He's said some really interesting things before in the past about death and dying, and the concept that it's like, it's just a continuum. We shed our physical form, but there's a continuum, and we go on. And so it's sort of like this idea. And this is where I get so emotional. And I don't know how you guys felt reading the epilogue, but I got emotional reading it because it is essentially Alvaro talking from whatever, the great whatever, not of this earthly plane anymore, but like the part where he says to her, a box of keys sat by the abandoned valet station. No one would be coming for any of those cars. The young woman, you, imagine the cars in 100 years, the parking lot swallowed by sand, the cars still waiting for drivers, long gone, long forgotten. We'll be fine, you said. You will, but you don't know that yet. You're just hoping.
The part through the epilogue that got me was on the next page where he says, you'll forget.
Yes.
But I'll come back one night. I'll come back in a dream. I'll tell you everything. You'll dream that the voice you heard is just a voice and not your brother. You'll wonder if I'm lying. You'll count my fingers. You'll remember us, mom, dad, alma mi. We carry each other. But that's years from now. Which the natives and a lot of like, like especially my family is like the dad will come and visit you at night in your sleep. And that's the part where I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I was crying.
I was like trying to read this book and I was like, oh my God, why are you always traumatizing me?
Ron, how did you feel about the epilogue?
Here's kind of how I know you're kind of left wondering, well, does Carmen actually get away? Does whoever the little girl is, the first Esther, does she get away? But back on page 272, where Alvaro, is mind, he's thinking, he said, you had little time, that if you wanted to live, you had to find a way out. You had to do your best to leave the orbit of the hotel. And how far away could you go, really? How long could you run down the abandoned dream of Fremont before you ran into other people, before life returned? Alvaro did not know, did you? You'd have to run far. You'd have to find a car and drive, which is exactly what she does.
Dang, I didn't even make that connection. Tie that passage to the ending.
That's why I want to read the book again. I did that with Sylvia. I did that. I would definitely just skip chapter 1. Like we're good. We know what's
we've established. We know what happens there. We're good.
Yeah. Once we hit Las Vegas and they're in the park, and I also like how they open up the park of Ellie in the park and like, I just want to show you guys, nice Las Vegas and like this secluded park, and it comes back because that's like one of the memories he has of him and Carmen together.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd recently, part of my book club was a book called Out Cold, and it's about hypothermia. And throughout the book, there's passages of a person experiencing hypothermia. And when the person starts to like lose their vitals, it talks about like they talk about their life flashing before their eyes. Especially when Alvaro is like going away, I'm like, please stay with me. Please stay with me. And I turn the page. I'm like, no, why?
Closing thoughts on the book or any other questions you have?
I would just say for people, power through that first chapter.
Oh, seriously. Or I could just do like a very, very big legal, like, so these things happen. All right. Start on page 10, My final thoughts is, that first chapter is like brutal, but Marisol getting filleted, splayed, and the cockroaches like becoming Dracula was traumatizing is the best way, because I hate bugs like that. But just like her essentially skinning, which the red threads are the people that have been skinned alive. Yeah.
Whatever.
The red threads is the skin. Did you guys pick up on that?
No.
She was making spools of the skin.
Ew.
And then
I will tell
that's
you,
why I think this book is good for rereading, because you would pick up on a lot of
those things.
A lot more of those little things that you may have missed just on first pass through, because I just need to get through this. I just need to get through this.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, and it's so interesting, the way in which everyone's perception is different, because by the time we got to Marisol's flaying, my brain could handle that. Maybe because I was just like, this feels so Event Horizon, Hellraiser. This feels so futuristic. My brain just processes it differently than it does the real horrors of like what happens in chapter 1, which happens.
Yeah.
Like that happens. And it's horrific to think about. And I'm sure so does flaying, obviously. But it's just like, for some reason, my brain goes into clinical mode for that.
Another thing I forgot to mention too is the mother, how they entertained her with television, which is why she hummed the Three's Company theme song. So they would bring her out to hunt and kind of be like, give me that one, give me that one, and give me that one. And then they would kind of just sit her in front of the television and she would like watch TV.
We never get to really learn who she is. Like, what is she?
No, we don't. And that's like the biggest, that was my other question.
And just the closest we get is when Alvaro surmises or connects dots that they're like telling their story wrong. It wasn't that the Elise or the face beneath the face made them sacrifice their daughters. By sacrificing their daughters, they created the face beneath the face.
It's a story that demands to be visualized. So somebody needs to make a studio exec deal with this for a movie or something. Well, Perla, what is going on coming up next for you, the book club?
So we have hit 55 members in the Morbid Curiosity West Seattle chapter. I know when I hit 50, I was like, I am having champagne. And considering my first month, I only had like 15 members, and that was in
15,
September.
that's still good,
great,
I think.
dude.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. So right now we're reading this book called the All That Is Wicked, and it is about a gentleman whose brain is the most studied brain in criminal psychology, and it is because he massacred an entire family and like lied, and this is where the word sociopath came from, and all these it is a good
His own
audiobook
family or
because
just another family?
no, he killed his wife, his daughter, like
So
father-in-law,
family
like just
annihilator.
yeah, it's and then the author actually reads the book, so that's when I really like reading the audiobook, is because the author is telling you, and so you get the cadence, you get the excitement and so forth. And then next month is Tremors in the Blood, which is about the birth of the lie detector, and I already have all my Maury Povich memes ready to go because during the pandemic, I would watch Maury Povich every lunch, and I would skip the baby daddy episodes and always watch the lie detector episodes. September's book is one I really want to plug. It is about
And y'all plan in advance.
Yeah, we get a year's notice. The September book is about the female periodistas, the journalists in Mexico that were killed. So that one's I'm really excited for. So find your local chapters. I really like that it's like it is nonfiction, and yes, there is some lighter subjects that we do read, but like we have the Waco Rising coming up in April. Yeah, the book club's been a lot of fun. I actually had a few businesses. Like there's this one bar called Two Finger Social that is a horror bar in Seattle, and they reached out to me like, hey, we would love to host your book club. And I'm like,
oh, how cool.
That is awesome.
That is cool.
Yeah, and that actually had filmed a music video for one of my directors that I met at a David Lynch festival of all things. And so I was just like, oh, cool. I've been to the bar. So I just thought it was like, oh, cool. This cool bar wants to host me and my book club people. So yeah, so definitely like reach out to your local chapters. I know there's one in Dallas, but there are like just go to the bookclub.org .club app. Yeah, I think it's .org, and just like look in.
Okay, so we will be posting stuff about our book, the next book club pick coming up in the days to come. We'll also be talking about our next movie selection. If you're not part of our Patreon, we encourage you listeners to join. It's free to join, $3 to unlock all the extra stuff. We do have some stuff coming up. We do have a watch party that Veronica and I are trying to nail down in February for Crimson Peak. So if you want to join us.
I love that movie. I've seen the costumes, and I'll send you the photos of me when I saw the Del Toro exhibit in Los Angeles, and that's what made me go home and like watch that movie.
Yes,
the costumes that Jessica Chastain wear are so detailed that I was like, oh, I got to watch this movie. What was I sleeping on? So.
It is a perfect February movie. So we're going to try and nail that down for a watch party for Patreon folks to join us on. So please, if you're not part of it, go join it. We'll link it in show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Don't Watch at Night is a Nest production hosted by me, Veronica, and Valerie. Editing by Valerie. Music by Omar Chakor. Production support for this episode provided by Lorenzo Villarreal and Alex Street. Listen to new episodes of Don't Watch at Night every other Monday, and don't forget to give us a rate and review. It's the best way to help us grow.